a beautiful day. It is a new day. It is a day of black awareness. It is a day of black people taking care of black people's business. Today, we are together. We are unified and on one accord. But when we are together, we got power and we can make decisions. Today on this program, you will hear gospel and rhythm and blues and jazz. All those are just labels. We know that music is music. All of our people got a soul. Our experience determines the texture, the taste, and the sound of our soul. We say that we may be in the slum, but the slum is not in us. We may be in prison, but the prison is not in us. In what we have shifted from burn, baby, burn to learn, baby, learn. We have shifted from having a seizure about what the man got to season what we need. We have shifted from bed bugs and dog ticks to community control and politics. That is why we gather today to celebrate our homecoming and our own sense of somebodyness. That is why I challenge you now to stand together, raise your fists together, and engage in our national black litany. Do it with courage and determination. I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be unskilled, but I am somebody. I am black, beautiful, proud. I must be respected. I must be protected. What time is it? When we stand together, what time is it? When we say no more yes to both, what time is it? What time is it? What time is it? Sister Kim Weston, the Black National Anthem.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the JustUS Youth Talk Show. This is Season 4, Episode 2. My name is Rachel, and I'm an associate producer for the show, and I am also your host today. So before we really dive in today with our topic and with our guest speaker, Ally, I want us to slow down and really imagine something. Imagine being a young person trying to focus on a math test, having fun with your friends, applying to college, or playing your favorite sport, while also wondering if your family will all be together around the dinner table tonight. Imagine seeing immigration officers in your neighborhood or outside of your school, and knowing that you are being watched because of how you look. Imagine living in fear that you will be separated from your loved ones at any given moment, and then imagine carrying that weight quietly while the world expects you to just be a kid and smile and go about your normal business. For many young people throughout the United States, they don't have to imagine this reality. This is what is actually going on. And this is the reality for some of our listeners today. So the entire team here for the JustUS Youth Talk Show felt strongly that we needed to have this conversation and we needed to have it now because immigration enforcement has become a major youth issue along with a community issue. So today, we're talking about ICE and youth immigration or youth incarceration. We're talking about what happens when immigration enforcement intersects with schools and the juvenile legal system. And most importantly, we're talking about what young people need to know to protect themselves, their families, and each other. This episode is about the facts and it's about empowerment during very uncertain times. So, with all of that said, I am truly honored to welcome our guest today, Ally Morcus. I'm going to read a little bit about Ally before we get started. So, Ally, she is an attorney and a legal fellow at the National Immigrant Justice Center here in Chicago. Ally's fellowship consists of school-based immigration projects focused on making immigration legal services more accessible to youth in Chicago public schools. She represents clients seeking forms of relief such as asylum and special immigrant juvenile status, as well as conducting Know Your Rights presentations at schools around the city. Her passion for this work stems from a lifelong commitment to serving vulnerable populations, particularly immigrant children. And prior to joining the National Immigrant Justice Center, Ally graduated magna cum laude from Notre Dame Law School. And in her free time, Ally enjoys reading, watching Notre Dame football, and cuddling with her cats, which is incredible. So welcome, Ally.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we're very, very excited to have you. So with that said, we're going to dive right in. So the first question I have for you is what inspired you to get involved in youth immigration law?
My interest in working with immigrant youth stems back to high school when I started volunteering as a tutor with an organization that served Latino youth in my hometown. And I love working with kids and young people, so I continued volunteering with a similar program throughout college. And I've always loved the Spanish language. I got my second major in it in undergrad, so by the time I figured out I wanted to become a lawyer, it quickly became clear to me that the field of immigration law was the perfect intersection of my academic and professional interests.
Wow, I love that experience started with volunteer work.
Yes, I think community service throughout my life has been a great source of fulfillment for me. So I went into law school knowing that I wanted to work in the public interest field to continue doing similar work.
Okay, wow, that's very interesting. And I appreciate you sharing sort of that beginning and how it led to this like amazing career that you have. Can you tell us a little bit about the National Immigrant Justice Center and your role there?
Yes. So NIJC is a nonprofit organization based in Chicago whose mission is to defend the rights of immigrants, asylees, and refugees in the US. We offer direct legal services to individual clients, but we also have teams that do federal litigation and policy advocacy. So I am a legal fellow on the non-detained kids team at NIJC. So my team primarily works with minors who are not currently in immigration detention. We represent them in proceedings before the immigration court, as well as before U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And the bulk of my caseload consists of asylum and special immigrant juvenile status cases, which I will talk a bit more about later on.
Yeah.
But what being a legal fellow means is basically you are an attorney working on a specific time-bound project. Often
Okay.
law grads will start out their careers in public interest with one of these fellowships, where you basically choose a nonprofit organization, work with them to design a project, and then pitch it to outside funders. So
Okay.
I was very fortunate. My law school awarded me a 2-year fellowship to work at NIJC and implement this school-based immigration project. So, as part of my project, I work very closely with a Chicago public high school with a large population of newcomer students, and I offer Know Your Rights presentations and immigration consultations to students there.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow. What an incredible opportunity you have there, and like a way to really engage with your interests and tying it with your desire to work in the legal sector. Just totally fantastic. So I want to touch a little bit because this show we talk a lot about incarceration. So I would like to create a little bit of an intersection of that with you. How does immigration enforcement intersect with youth incarceration?
That's a great question. For one thing, contact with the criminal system can alert immigration authorities to an undocumented individual's lack of status
Okay.
and potentially trigger deportation proceedings to be commenced against that person. Um, the impact varies by location, but some local law enforcement agencies share information with federal authorities like ICE. So a youth could theoretically get arrested and face only a brief period of incarceration before having the charges dismissed or entering a plea deal, only to get released and then immediately get picked up by ICE. So this can
Okay.
happen not only to people with zero legal status, but also to asylees, legal permanent residents, anyone.
Okay. So that's a very strong intersection from what I'm seeing that can connect very quickly. So understanding both sides of this argument is really important.
For sure.
Yeah. So um, this kind of ties into what we were just saying, but are immigrant youth more vulnerable to entering the juvenile legal system?
They can be, and not because they are more likely to commit crimes
Mhm.
than their non immigrant counterparts, but because some of the socioeconomic factors that increase a person's risk of contact with the criminal legal system disproportionately impact immigrant populations. So, for example, many newcomer families are low income, which can be exacerbated by the fact that they may have to wait a long time to get a work permit, or their foreign degrees may not be recognized in the US. So many reasons. And not only is there plenty of research explaining the correlation between poverty and crime, but also low income folks are more likely to face legal consequences than higher income people when they do commit crimes because
Yes,
of factors like unequal access to legal services and other community resources.
absolutely. You just nailed that, the answer to that, and covered all the different dimensions of what is going to impact that individual who might come into contact with immigration issues. So thank you. Um, I want to talk a little bit more about ICE and then a little bit more about youth detention in that aspect. Could you educate the audience about who ICE is, and then kind of talk about what authority they have, and well, we'll start there and then we'll follow with that.
Yes. So ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It is a federal law enforcement agency under the Department of Homeland Security. So it's an arm of the executive branch. And ICE has a couple different components, but the one that people usually think of when they think of ICE is the enforcement and removal operations component.
Mhm.
So their responsibility is to identify, arrest, and deport immigrants suspected of violating US immigration laws. So while this does mean ICE has pretty broad enforcement authority, it's important to note that they are not the same as criminal law enforcement officers.
Mhm.
Um, and I will touch on this more later as well, but
Yeah.
violations of immigration law are civil infractions, not crimes. Um,
Okay.
yes, but
Okay.
nonetheless, ICE agents are permitted to make warrantless arrests in public if they reasonably suspect a person lacks lawful status. I will note they do need a signed judicial warrant to enter your home or private spaces. But they do have pretty broad enforcement authority.
Okay. Sort of tying into this, from your perspective, like, what have you seen? And this is a very large question, I know, but what have you seen transpire over the last year with ICE, and in particularly as it relates to youth here in Chicago?
What we've been seeing over the past year in Chicago is like nothing we've ever seen before, especially back in the fall. ICE agents were everywhere, it felt like. They were waiting outside schools to apprehend parents during student pickup and drop off. They entered a daycare in my neighborhood to haul away one of the teachers in front of her students. And as you can imagine, the impact on youth has been staggering. Public schools have reported drastic decreases in attendance, especially among English language learner populations, because families are afraid to even leave their homes.
Yes. And as a Chicago resident myself, I have definitely seen and experienced and heard these stories as well. And I appreciate your perspective on it, especially with the work that you do. So getting into, I guess I want to talk a little bit about the differences between juvenile detention and immigration detention for our audience so that they can sort of see the differences between those.
Absolutely. So juvenile detention usually refers to the confinement of youths of any immigration status who have been accused or convicted of a delinquent act, which is basically what we call it when a juvenile commits a crime. And juvenile detention is usually run at the state or county level, and citizens and non-citizens alike can enter juvenile detention. Immigration detention, however, is not specifically for people who have been convicted or even accused of committing a crime. ICE operates facilities, and they also contract with jails and prisons to detain people suspected of violating U.S. immigration law. So some of these folks may have been convicted of a crime in the past, but many of them never have been. And I would describe immigration detention as a sort of limbo for many non-citizens who are either waiting for their case to be heard by an immigration judge, or for those who have already been ordered removed and are now awaiting deportation.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. And what would you say that sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself with my thoughts. Are immigrant youth placed in immigration detention facilities?
Yes, but they are typically different than adult-only detention facilities.
Okay.
So the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, operates a system of shelters for unaccompanied children, which is the term for minors who entered the country without a parent or legal guardian. So when a child enters the ORR shelter system, the goal is usually to release that child to a relative or another sponsor in the United States.
Okay.
So the goal is for the child to not be detained while their immigration case plays out.
Okay.
Which is great. But when a family is picked up by ICE, parents may choose to take their children with them to a detention facility. And ICE operates a few family-specific detention facilities for these situations. But
Okay.
oftentimes, children are separated from their parents when the parent is detained. And in those cases, the child is either left with another caregiver or enters that ORR shelter system for unaccompanied children while the parent is detained in an adult only facility.
I see. Okay. I guess I'm curious about some of these family detainment centers. What are the conditions like in places like this?
Um, a lot of reports show that conditions are pretty unsafe and unsanitary in family detention facilities as well as adult only facilities.
Okay.
Detainees have reported contaminated water, expired food, being denied medical care, sleep deprivation due to constant interruption and the lights never being turned off, um, confinement to their cells for weeks at a time in violation of the facility's own policies. And for kids specifically, the government is supposed to continue providing an education for minors in immigration detention, but oftentimes they don't, or they only provide, say, an hour of instruction a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and pretty horrific. It's about what you would expect, I guess, in this situation, but doesn't make it right nonetheless.
Mhm.
So, I'm hearing this and it's like criminalization is coming to my mind. And if you're in an immigration detention like center, is that really considered criminal? And does that like distinction matter in this case?
That's a great question. So, no, as I mentioned previously, immigration
Yeah.
detention is a civil matter rather than criminal. And I do think that that distinction matters for a few reasons.
Okay.
Um, First, immigration detention serves a completely different purpose from criminal incarceration. So, in theory, immigration detention is meant to ensure that a person appears for their immigration proceedings or for removal, whereas criminal incarceration is meant to punish a person for a crime or, in a less cynical view, to rehabilitate them or to deter future offenses. Um, but society has placed a moral judgment on certain actions by labeling them crimes. So when we detain immigrants in nearly identical conditions, I think it can influence people to place a similar moral judgment on them.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that people who commit crimes deserve that moral judgment either.
Yeah.
Everyone has human dignity and deserves basic human rights. But I do think it's
Yes.
interesting how that can influence our perception of immigrants. And um, the last thing I'll say on that is that
Yeah.
the fact that immigration is civil rather than criminal actually results in those individuals being afforded fewer rights and protections than criminal detainees. For example, all people charged with a crime in the United States have the right to a government appointed defense attorney, but there exists no similar right to an appointed immigration attorney.
Yes. Yeah. And this is, I mean, you sort of nailed where I was going or what I was thinking with some of this. There is such a heavy criminalization going on with immigration right now. And you have the factual component of what's really happening, but then the public perception. So I appreciate you naming that and pointing that out to me and also our viewers. We're going to get a little bit more into the criminalization component. How can minor offenses put undocumented youth at risk? I know we touched on this a little bit before, but if you have a few other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, even minor things like traffic violations can put undocumented youth at risk of deportation. Like I mentioned earlier, contact with the criminal system can have a lot of different outcomes based on a lot of different factors, but in some situations, it can lead to a person being placed into deportation proceedings.
Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't take much. You can be at very great risk. And what happens if an undocumented youth is arrested?
It depends on certain factors like the child's age, the charge, any prior history, and local law enforcement's cooperation with ICE. But
Okay.
as far as the criminal legal system goes, an undocumented youth is afforded the same rights as anyone else, including the right to due process and the right to a defense attorney.
Okay. Thank you. And are there certain charges that are especially dangerous from an immigration standpoint?
Yes. So I won't go into the nuances of how criminal charges are categorized in the immigration law
Okay.
context because it can get a little confusing,
Okay.
but um, some are definitely more severe than others. In general, I would say that drug convictions and crimes of violence are especially dangerous from an immigration standpoint. Um, the most severe category of charges in immigration law are called aggravated felonies, and they can make you ineligible for most forms of immigration relief. And then
Okay.
there's a lesser category of offenses known as crimes of moral turpitude, and that is a notoriously vague term that can be used to cover all sorts of criminal acts. And the impact of those charges can also lead to ineligibility for certain forms of relief or deportability as well.
Okay. Yeah. So the charges can make a pretty big difference in
Yes.
sort of outcomes for these situations. Um, and again, this one you touched on a little bit earlier as well. But does the juvenile system share information with ICE?
Um, it really depends on where you're located.
Okay.
So here in Illinois, we have legislation called the Trust Act, which prohibits law enforcement from assisting with immigration enforcement. And that includes a general prohibition on sharing information that is not publicly available with ICE. So here in Illinois, in theory, the juvenile system should not share information with ICE. And a lot of places also afford greater privacy protections to juveniles than to adults as well.
Okay.
But again, it can vary depending on where you're located. So I would recommend looking into local laws on that.
Fair. Okay. So, right, that depends where you're located. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for all of that information, Ally. So, we are going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we return, we're going to focus on knowing your rights and some practical action steps for youth and their families. Thank you.
Introducing Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the JustUS Youth Talk Show. Discover your gateway to success today.
All right, we are back after our little break. We are here with Ally Morcus. We are going to get into knowing some of our rights and also some legal protections. So the first question I have for you, Ally, is if ICE shows up near or at a school or even in your community, what do students need to know?
The first thing I would say is that their number one priority should be to keep themselves physically safe. So this means that regardless of your immigration status, you should cooperate with law enforcement officers. And that does not mean you have to answer their questions, which I will come back to in a moment, but you should not try to physically interfere with their operations or to fight or resist arrest. Keeping yourself physically safe in the moment is the most important thing. And students should also know that ICE cannot enter a school or their home or any other private place without either consent or a warrant signed by a judge. And here in Chicago, Chicago Public Schools has a policy of not permitting immigration officers to enter school property because we want children to feel safe at school. So that is something that students should take some comfort in, that this safe space is meant to continue being a safe space for them.
Thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful message for students, and I appreciate you giving just the factual picture of how to handle this. And what rights do students have if they are questioned by ICE?
The most important one that I always emphasize is the right to remain silent. Everyone in the United States, regardless of immigration status, holds this right. So if a student is being questioned by an ICE officer, they can always say, I have the right to remain silent and I will not answer any questions without an attorney. Okay. Students are also, if they're being questioned, they can ask an officer, am I under arrest or am I free to leave? And if the officer indicates that they are free to leave, students should walk away calmly. But they do have a right to ask that question.
Okay. So they can ask, but you definitely don't have to start answering anything that's going on. Okay.
Definitely not. No.
Yes. Do you think that students should disclose their immigration status in these situations?
It really depends on a student's situation.
Okay.
I would always recommend erring on the side of caution. So, of course, if a student is a US citizen, they should not be afraid to inform an officer of that. If they are a green card holder or a legal permanent resident, then it is probably safe to disclose that as well. But I would recommend that non-citizens never disclose their immigration status unless they are actively being detained and they want ICE to know that they actually do have legal status. So, for example, you might have a pending asylum application, and I would not immediately disclose that to an ICE officer questioning you because it does give away the fact that you are not a citizen, even though you are going through the correct legal processes.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But if they are actively detaining you, then disclosing that you have a pending asylum application might persuade them to release you. It's also very important never to lie about your immigration status because falsely claiming to be a citizen can have negative consequences for your immigration case. So when in doubt, stay silent until you have consulted with an attorney.
Thank you, Ally. So for students, for our audience, in a high stress situation involving immigration enforcement, what guidance would you give youth to help students stay calm and protect themselves?
Take a deep breath first and foremost.
Advice, yes.
Yes. I encourage youth to practice their responses to ICE before they find themselves in this situation. So it might feel silly, but I tell people to practice saying in the mirror, I have the right to remain silent. I will not answer any questions without an attorney. Practice asking, am I free to go? Because that will make it easier when you're in fight or flight mode to say these phrases if you've practiced them before. And again, it's also important to remember that you should prioritize your physical safety in these situations. So while your instinct might be to run away or resist, you never know how an officer will react, and you can't control how they react. You can only control how you act. So it is probably better to get detained, even wrongfully, and then fight it later in court than to be injured or even killed by an officer.
Yes, that was such fantastic advice for our listeners, and an incredible perspective. And just really, I love that you keep prioritizing the safety, the physical safety, and going back to that, because that is so valuable. And it's just a place that we have to work from with this. So thank you for that. So, do you think that families should create emergency or safety plans? And what might that look like?
Yes, that's a great question. So I usually tell families to think in advance about who they want to care for their children in the event that the parent is detained. Um, Make sure that children have the phone number of an emergency contact memorized in case a parent is detained and the child is left without supervision. But parents should also think in advance about if they are going to be deported, whether they want their children to come with them or remain in the US.
Okay.
And families should have these wishes written down somewhere. So you can just Google family safety planning, and a lot of organizations have really simple worksheets that families can fill out, just listing your child's name, crucial information like medication and medical history, and the name of a trusted adult who you would like to care for them in temporary situations.
I see. Yeah. So it's very much emphasis on getting these things written down, thinking these things through before this is going on. So you're not scrambling in the moment trying to figure out what to do. Excellent, again, advice. I wanted to pivot back a little bit. You mentioned this earlier. Can you explain special immigrant juvenile status and how that supports youth?
Yes. So SIJS for short is a path to legal permanent residency for children who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by one or both of their parents. And it is designed to protect vulnerable immigrant youth who cannot be reunified with one or both of their parents,
Okay.
allowing them to remain safely in the US with either the custodial parent or a legal guardian. And youth can qualify for special immigrant juvenile status regardless of whether the abuse, neglect, abandonment occurred here in the US or elsewhere. And obtaining this status basically puts a child in a line to wait for a green card to become available, but
Okay.
it can take many years before that happens, between being approved for SIJS and being eligible to get your green card.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that to the audience and letting us know a little bit more about that resource. So, along with knowing your rights, how important is it for youth to have legal representation when dealing with immigration issues? And what do they need to know about getting an attorney?
I would say it is so important to seek out legal representation.
Hmm.
The immigration system is unbelievably complex, and it can be really difficult to navigate even for attorneys. Um, so, in asylum cases, for example, over 50% of folks who are represented by an attorney are granted asylum, whereas only around 19% of unrepresented people win asylum. So, your chances of obtaining relief are significantly higher if you do have an attorney.
Okay.
And the most important thing about getting an attorney is to make sure they are accredited. Unfortunately, I have heard many stories of people getting scammed by people posing as immigration attorneys.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Sometimes notary publics will offer to fill out immigration forms and people won't realize the difference between that and an attorney. Other times it's people who are actively trying to run a scam to make some money, but you should always look up the person you work with to make sure they are either a licensed attorney or a Department of Justice accredited representative before retaining their services. And if you cannot afford a private attorney, then I recommend that youth look into pro bono or low-cost legal services in their area. So organizations like mine and other nonprofits offer services at no cost to clients who meet certain income requirements.
Thank you for explaining the ins and outs of that, and also the warning about, making sure that your attorney is somebody who is qualified to provide the services that they're stating. That is something that I hadn't even thought of, but I appreciate you mentioning that here, because I could see that running you into many issues. So thank you for that,
absolutely.
Ally. Yes. So we're a few minutes ahead, but we are going to do, from our audience, we are going to do a Q&A section here in just a moment. Our other associate producer, Camila, is going to hop on and handle that part. Oh, here she is on cue. Hi, Camila.
Hello. Hi, my name's Camilla, and I'm another intern here at Next Generation Media, and I'll be helping with the Q&A portion of today's episode, or what we call maximizing the moment. I want to begin with thanking Ally for coming on today's show and speaking on the topic of ICE and youth incarceration and just knowing your rights. I think this topic is super important, especially with everything going on right now. One of the first questions that we have, I know we touched a lot about students knowing their rights, but what documentation should an individual prepare to keep with them in case they are approached by ICE or in an emergency situation?
That's a really great question. So I always say that the best ID to carry is one issued by the state where you live. So if you have a driver's license or in the city of Chicago, a Chicago city key, something like that, then you will be able to show a form of identification to law enforcement that does not indicate your immigration status in any way. If you have a valid permanent residency or green card, then I also recommend carrying that with you at all times because that will serve as evidence of your lawful status. If you have an employment authorization document, I also recommend carrying that on you, but with the caveat that it would not be the first thing I show to ICE as ID or evidence, because for some officers, it may be sufficient for them to let you go, but it doesn't guarantee protection from enforcement action. So that's something that I would only pull out in a situation where you are about to be detained and you want to show that you do have a legal status of some sort. I advise against carrying a passport from another country or any form of ID from your home country, because ICE could conclude that you don't have permission to be in the United States, whether that's true or not. Number one, ID from the state in which you live. But number two, it is probably best to carry some form of ID, anything that I've mentioned, as opposed to no form of ID.
Thank you. Are there misconceptions about ICE or immigration enforcement that you often have to correct during the Know Your Rights presentations that you give?
Yes, I think there is a really common misconception that ICE only targets people who aren't doing it the right way. And I think most people don't really know what it even means to do things the right way. Um, Unfortunately, you can go through all the steps that you need to obtain legal status. And because the immigration system moves so slowly, you might be stuck waiting for a decision in your case for many, many years. And it's possible that you could get detained by ICE during that time. And that doesn't mean that you weren't doing it the right way. In fact, you did everything you possibly could, but because you just haven't received an approval yet, you could be subject to detention. So that is just one of many misconceptions that I think people have in general, that stem from a lack of understanding of how complex the immigration system is.
And to build off of that, you spoke about how the system it's slow. Do the government shutdowns that happen, do they affect that system at all, or does the system keep running even during those shutdowns?
That's a great question. So, generally, when the government shuts down, there is also a pause on adjudication of immigration applications. So that definitely can contribute to the process slowing down. Um, I I honestly cannot remember whether the immigration court stays open or not during government shutdowns, but there is such a huge backlog of pending asylum cases, pending special immigrant juvenile status cases, just so many things that the government doesn't have the the capacity to adjudicate in a timely fashion.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we support our communities in these times?
That is a wonderful question. I would recommend signing up to join your local rapid response network. In Chicago, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, along with several other neighborhood groups, organized rapid response teams for people to support their own communities. So, if you sign up for something like this, then you can receive trainings about how to safely alert your neighbors to ICE presence in the community, how to report ICE activity to legal organizations, and other ways to support your peers by um, signing up for grocery delivery or school drop off and pickup for parents who can't or are afraid to do those things. So there are so many opportunities to get involved and support your community. If you just look anywhere for them, then I highly recommend getting involved.
Thank you. And then the last question that we had, um, sorry, there's one other. Is there a nationwide rapid response team?
That is a good question. I believe that they are all locally based. And I think that makes it easier to organize on a smaller, more local level. But there are certainly national immigration organizations that you can contact to report ICE activity or to request assistance or referrals and things like that. But as far as getting involved in a rapid response team in your local community, I would look to the local level.
And then building off of that, is there like a network of those rapid response teams, or is it just looking locally to see what you can find?
There are networks like I mentioned previously, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights that
Mhm.
organizes a network of various rapid response teams. So you can look to those larger organizations that organize on a higher level, and then they can point you to the team that is more local to your community.
Thank you. And then now this is our last question. What is one thing you hope our youth can learn from this podcast? Like what are the key takeaways that you wish to be taken from this?
Number one, you have rights, even no matter what your immigration status is, you are protected by the Constitution. And I think it's important to know that. Number two, it makes sense if you feel scared or uncertain during these times, but you are not alone and you are not weak for feeling that way. But know that there is an army of people fighting for you. And we are so much stronger as a community when we support one another.
Thank you. That is all the questions that I have. I'll give it back to Rachel.
Thanks, Camila. Thanks for jumping on with some questions. So we are nearing the end of our show for today. I have a few kind of like two closing questions to sort of wrap things up. Honestly, they tied a lot into what we just talked about. So if there's anything additional you want to add, I think you kind of got into it. But first thing I wanted to ask you is that, like, given all of the challenges that we've talked about, like, what are some words of encouragement or advice that you would give to immigrant youth who are feeling very scared right now or sort of uncertain about what's going on?
Again, it makes sense to feel scared, and that should not be a shameful feeling. These issues can feel really overwhelming. But I would also say you are more than your immigration status. Your value, your intelligence, your talents, none of that is defined by paperwork. And again, there are so many people behind you supporting you. Your teachers, counselors, neighbors are here to support you. Lawyers and policymakers are working to make the immigration system more just every day. And there are so many immigrant youth who have walked this path before and built meaningful, beautiful lives in the United States. So do not let fear take away your hope.
Absolutely true. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Ally, for those words of encouragement to our listeners. And I guess as a final takeaway, and you already gave a few wonderful suggestions, particularly about the rapid response teams, but are there any other practical and safe advocacy steps that our listeners can take to protect themselves or support their peers that might be impacted by ICE?
Yes, apart from joining local rapid response networks, I really encourage people to reach out to their elected officials and advocate for better immigration policy by contacting your congressman and even at the city level, local officials. And a way that you can support peers also, really simple and silly, but get a whistle. That is something that people in Chicago have been using to alert others to the presence of ICE in their communities. So if you carry a whistle around with you, that is a very simple way that you can support your peers who might be impacted by ICE.
Incredible. Again, thank you, Ally, so much. So I don't know. I don't have any other questions for you. But I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Ally, and for the incredible work that you were doing here in Chicago and how that spreads out through our whole country. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's listening, and thank you for joining us today. Please tell your friends and family about what you've learned on this episode. Share that with everyone. And also don't forget to share this video and subscribe to our channels. Continue to stay informed about what's going on in your community and take care of each other over anything else. Once again, we'll see you all here next time for episode 3, season 4 of the JustUS Youth Talk Show. And goodbye to everybody who's listening, and thank you all for being here.
It's choice time. All this talk about qualification. What do the blacks know about foreign policy? It's an insult. I was 3 years old. I came into my consciousness. My daddy was coming home from the war. Foreign policy. If he was so dumb, how'd he get over there and get back? If he didn't know foreign policy, why'd they give him a gun? And when they gave it to him, he knew which way to shoot. We know foreign policy. When you buy Honda and Toyota, that's foreign policy. That's right. Russian vodka, that's foreign policy. Panasonic and Sony, that's foreign policy. Mercedes-Benz, that's foreign policy. As a matter of fact, we came here on a foreign policy.